In ancient Greece, when a man went onto the streets and said lots of things which didn't make a lot of sense, he was called a philosopher. If I did that in the modern era, people would say I was on weed. In ancient Greece, there were two kinds of philosophers. People that had no money and were sleeping on the streets, so they said a lot of random stuff so people would get them to go away by giving them money. There was also the really rich people who wanted to sound smart when they really didn't know what they were talking about. Nevertheless, it required people who had nothing else to do with their lives, like Socrates. Socrates owned no property, and he lived with one of his friends for free. He spent most of his time preaching his beliefs in the streets of Athens, which was a city in ancient Greece. If you didn't know that, pick up a geography book. He didn't want people to pay for his lessons, he wanted to give them away for free. He wanted open knowledge to be accessible. Like me, Socrates hated writing, but unlike me, Socrates had young people at his disposal to force to write his ideas down for him. One of these was Plato. Plato was one of the greatest philosophers of all time, alongside Socrates. However, there is difficulty in finding the definition between where Plato's work starts and Socrates' work ends. Socrates was a lot like some of the modern university campus hopping question people. I don't know if that's an actual term. If that was derogatory, I'm really sorry. However, he went around Athens and he would teach people in the streets by using a method called the Socratic method. The Socratic method entailed a conversation between himself and the learner to evoke a sort of critical thinking which helped the learner to learn by themselves with the aid of Socrates. This was also the writing style that Plato later used in his books, where he had a fictitious version of Socrates as the teacher and another character as the learner. This was how Plato wrote down all of his ideas, even the ones completely unrelated to Socrates. Some of the people in Greece, though, however, did not like him and said that he was corrupting the youth and whatever impiety is. Socrates believed that he had a daimonium, which was a sacred inner voice which told him all of his ideas. However, the impiety was because a lot of the Greeks believed that this was absolutely naff. There was no basis behind this, and that he should be praising all of the traditional gods like everyone else, because he had to be difficult. Socrates had no affiliation with P. Diddy or Jeffrey Epstein. He then forced one of his corrupted youths to write a text for him called The Apology of Socrates, which entailed his defence for why he shouldn't get the death sentence. His first defence was something called Socratic ignorance. He basically said, "I'm dumb, I don't know anything." Or in Socrates' words, "I know that I know nothing." One of Socrates' friends spoke to an oracle at Delphi who told his friend that Socrates was the wisest man alive. To this, Socrates disagreed, so Socrates went and visited philosophers and artisans and many other smart people. He then later decided that he was actually the wisest person because all of these people went around saying that they knew everything, and he realised that it was impossible to know everything, so therefore he was wiser than them because he knew less. His second argument was aimed at Meletus. I don't know who he was, but he's somehow important to this story. He said to Meletus, "Look, if I'm bad for these children, then who's improving the lives of the youth? Who's not corrupting them?" And to this, Meletus said, "Literally everyone else in Athens." His next offence was calling all of the youth horses. Not sheep, not wolves, horses. They also charged him with various other things, like intentionally harming the youth and being an atheist, but I won't go into detail because it's incredibly boring and I can't be bothered. Socrates' final point was that if they were going to kill him, he would just enjoy it. Socrates claims that when he died, he would have two options. Either he would be in an endless sleep forever, or he would get to converse with the fallen heroes from past generations. He was given one final offer that if he stopped doing philosophy, they would save his life, which seems like a win-win, but he decides to turn it down. He stated that the unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates spent his final moments getting Plato, one of his students, to write for him again. This time, Plato wrote the book Phaedo, which contains Socrates' last moments alive. Plato was poisoned to death, but his last words were, "Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay it and do not neglect it." This may sound peculiar, like, who is Crito? Who is Asclepius? And what's a cock? Well, a cock is a kind of rooster. Asclepius was the god of medicine and health. And Crito was one of Plato's friends, and Socrates' friends. All these philosophers, they were all friends. Those who aren't dirty-minded of you would realise that a cock, a rooster, was meant to be a sacrifice to the god of health and medicine. You would normally do this in ancient Greek era if you had some sort of illness which had gone away as a sign of thank you to the god. Friedrich Nietzsche, along with many others, believed that it was Socrates' belief that he was passing on to the next life, and life was an illness, and he wanted to get rid of that illness, and his soul was set free by moving on to the next life. But what does Friedrich know? None of us actually know what he was talking about. Maybe it was just the poison setting in. Was Socrates on any drugs? Who knows? Plato was a massive teacher's pet to Socrates, so when Socrates left, he continued his work and began to learn more and more about philosophy. But we'll get on that tomorrow. Not tomorrow, whenever I next do this. Maybe in 2 weeks, maybe in 3 weeks, maybe never again. Until then, goodbye.